Welcome back to the Splash Live, Greater West Bloomfield's live daily news and talk show. I'm Tyler Kieft alongside Diane Chabon. There's plenty of history to learn about, not just in the Greater West Bloomfield area, but all throughout the Detroit and the metropolitan Detroit area. And one of the places you can go to get a look at all of those different areas of our local history is the Detroit Historical Museum. Plenty of fun events and really interesting stuff happening in September and all throughout the fall. And joining us now to talk about that is the Chief Development and Communications Officer of the Detroit Historical Museum, Rebecca Salminen Witt. Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always fun to be with you.
Yeah, it's always fun to have the Detroit Historical Museum and Detroit Historical Society joining us to talk about their fun events that are coming up, learning a lot about Detroit, but also the metropolitan area and so much of our history intertwining between the suburbs and the city. It's been a really busy time over the last several months since we last spoke with you on our programs about the Detroit Historical Society. In fact, you're a resource for everyone in Detroit and the local area, and have kind of taken on the Detroit Starts Here moniker to kind of encompass everything you're doing in the city of Detroit and for our local area. So take us through a little bit of what's going on right now at the Detroit Historical Society and some things we can expect in the near future.
Gosh, so much. You're right. I mean, we have been so busy. And you're right. We do say Detroit starts here. And we say that because, quite frankly, anyone who's going to have an experience in our region should start at the Detroit Historical Society because it's going to give you the context for everything else that you have experienced or you're going to experience in the area. We tell Detroit stories, why they matter. And when we say Detroit, we aren't really talking about the region because wherever you live, whether it's West Bloomfield or Troy or Trenton, you're going to have some connection to the city and you're going to find the roots of that connection, your own stories in our halls and on our walls. And so most recently, we have really brought in a bunch of new exhibits and, we bring probably 8 to 10 new exhibits in a year. And they are only around for kind of a short time, usually about, 3 or 4 months. So right now in the Historical Museum, you're going to be able to find some really cool stuff that's only going to be there until about Labor Day. So you want to get in soon. You want to see this stuff. We've got a really cool exhibit in the auditorium showcase. So that's just the entryway to our auditorium on the lower level. It's called Black Baseball in Living Color. And it's just a beautiful exhibition. It's 237 portraits taken from kind of baseball cards of African-American baseball players from the Negro Leagues back in the day, right? And so many of these guys you only ever saw in black and white. And so this artist basically created oil portraits, really small, kind of this big, of 237 of these guys. And it's the first time many of us have ever had the opportunity to see them in color. Thus the name, Black Baseball in Living Color. It's a beautiful exhibit. It's just up through the end of September, that one is. So you've got a little time to come and see it. We're actually going to do a book talk with some authors who have written on this subject at the end of September, on September 23rd. So if you're interested, take a look for that. We've also got a new exhibit in the museum called The Soul of Philanthropy. This is a national traveling exhibit, so it's pretty special that we have it. It's upstairs in our community gallery. And this exhibit tells the story of African-American philanthropists all throughout the country. It's a gorgeous exhibit. As I said, it's a really kind of peaceful feel in the community gallery. And it is twinned up with a sister exhibit called Detroit Gives Black, which is 81 portraits of Detroit's Black philanthropists. Another really cool, very moving exhibit. It'll kind of take you through the whole second floor of the museum. So another really, really fun one to see. Now at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum, because don't forget we've got 2 museums. So if you're on Belle Isle, if you find yourself out summering, like so many of us do on Belle Isle this summer, we've got a new exhibit there also. It's called Microplastics, and it talks about microplastics and their effect on the Great Lakes and specifically on the Detroit River and kind of right where the Dossin Great Lakes Museum sits. That's another really fun one, and it's only up for probably about a year, so you'll be able to see that one through the spring.
Yeah, 8 to 10 new exhibits all throughout the year, but you also have permanent exhibits at the Detroit Historical Museum too, so people can get kind of a broader look at our history and not have things kind of coming and going all throughout the year solely. So if people want to go down to the Detroit Historical Museum, a great place to start is those permanent exhibits, and a great place to go when something interesting catches your eye is to those 8 to 10 new exhibits that circle through the year. So tell us about some of the permanent exhibits and how that also gives a different look at some of Detroit's history and the ways that that connects to the outskirts of Detroit and into the suburbs.
Well, the permanent exhibits at both museums really, but those are kind of the old favorites. So those are what you're going to come and you're going to see, and you can depend on seeing the stuff that you love. We're always going to have the glancy trains that tell, it's a model railroader story. Every kid loves the glancy trains in the lower level of the Detroit Historical Museum. You're always going to be able to go into the pilot house at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum and act as though you are driving a freighter down the Detroit River. One of the things that people don't realize is that we do update those permanent exhibits in the museum. So, for instance, one of our key exhibits in the Detroit Historical Museum was called Frontiers to Factories. It told kind of the story of Detroit's first 300 years of settlement and the migration that happened there. We've recently started a 3-year update of that exhibit. It's now called Origins: Life Where the River Bends, which is a nod to the Native American word for the area of the river where Detroit sits now. We've just done the first third of that. The second 2/3 of it is going to come next summer. It's got new interactive technology in there. It's got more interpretation. There's new artifacts to see in there. So there's always something new to see, even in your old favorites. People always ask us about the streets of old Detroit. Streets of Old Detroit is, it's a representation of what Detroit was like, back 100 years ago. It starts or 120 years ago now. It starts in 1900, takes you all the way back to 1840. And it's a really good representation of what cities and towns in Michigan, really throughout Michigan, looked like in that period. That's when people always say, well, you haven't changed the streets of Old Detroit, right? That's what I remember from when I was here in 3rd grade or when I was a kid and my grandma brought me. We never changed that too much, but we always constantly are updating it. So this fall, viewers can look forward to, when they visit, some new technology down there as well. That's going to be QR code enabled. So you're going to be able to use your cell phone, your own device, and get additional interpretation, more of the stories, some more kind of clips and interesting facts and factoids about what you're actually experiencing as you're walking through the streets of Old Detroit. So always something new to see there as well.
You can find more information on ongoing exhibits as well as the permanent exhibits at the Detroit Historical Museum, as well as the Dossin Great Lakes Museum by visiting DetroitHistorical.org. The daily hours throughout the week for the Detroit Historical Museum, Wednesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. until 5 p.m., and Sunday, 1 p.m. until 5 p.m. Just $10 for adults, $8 for seniors, students, active duty, military, and first responders with a valid ID, and for kids, $6 or $35 for an entire household to get in for the day and see all these different exhibits all throughout the year. Rebecca, before we let you go, anything else that may be exciting coming up in the near future we should be keeping our eye out for and maybe sticking up to date with DetroitHistorical.org to learn more about?
Absolutely. We've got a new exhibit on Chinatown in Detroit. And coming up in the spring, we've got one with the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit that's going to come to the community gallery as well. So a lot of good stuff coming. Keep an eye on that website because there's always something new to see.
Yeah, whether you were going from the city of Sylvan Lake and their ice cream social we talked about recently with Helen Jane Peters, or the Kegel Harbor Memorial Day Parade, or Michigan Week in West Bloomfield, all these different events, all these different things of historical significance in these communities, you can probably trace back to somewhere in the city of Detroit. And that's why we bring on the Detroit Historical Society to talk to us about these great exhibits all throughout the year. A lot of fun down at the Detroit Historical Museum and the Dossin Great Lakes Museum. Rebecca, thank you as always for joining us.
My pleasure.
Always glad to have them on DetroitHistorical.org for more information all throughout the year on upcoming events, upcoming exhibits, and of course, all the permanent exhibits at all across their museums in Detroit and about Detroit and the metro area.